welcome everyone who is assembled to remember and commemorate the life of our friend, our comrade, fellow traveler, Bill Beik. Bill's Pittsburgh family of the Battle of Homestead organization extends a warm welcome to his family, to his friends who have come here to honor Bill as a teacher, a scholar, and a gentle but determined man. We especially extend our love and sympathy to his beloved wife, Millie, who has been such an integral and important part of our organization's growth in its efforts to preserve and celebrate the life and struggle of coal miners and steel workers, all workers, and the poor of our land. Millie and Bill's coming to Pittsburgh grew out of Millie's efforts to honor the miners of Windber, efforts that Bill strongly supported. They came first to my neighborhood of Mount Washington from Atlanta, and they found there a base to explore Pittsburgh area, find a house, and create a home that welcomed so many of us so often over the years. My personal tie to Bill grew out of his deep and abiding love of France, its countryside, his devotion to Paris, France's mystical heart and capital, of its music, and especially his love of liberté, égalité, fraternité, vive la France. It was a love that I shared. His studies of the common people of France, their struggles, revolts, and uprisings made his engagement in the struggles of the workers of Western Pennsylvania for dignity and a voice on the job a pure and natural transition. And now I'd like to invite Mike Stout. Bill was a lover of all music, folk, rock, jazz, and classical. That's very appropriate to begin this remembrance with a song by Mike Stout and Kevin McDonald. Mike was the last head grievance man for the United Steelworkers Local 1397 in the Great Steel Mill, whose pump house is where we stand today.
This first song, Turn, 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 is a sing-along, so we hope everybody joins with us. It's a song specially requested by Millie Beik. So. To everything, turn, turn, turn. There is a season, turn, turn, turn. And a time for every purpose under heaven. A time to be born, a time to die, a time to plant, a time to reap, a time to give, a time to heal, a time Thank you, Millie.
Every organization, I think, should have a chaplain. And we're very pleased and honored, one who often shares our breakfast table, Father J. Geisler, is going to give the invocation.
My bishop was expecting me to be at an ordination today, and I told him I was going to be at a funeral, and they asked me where, and I told them at the pump house down at the waterfront. And I don't think he got it initially, although he has been a chaplain for the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers. So when I explained that this is indeed sacred ground, he immediately got it. And this is indeed, I think part of it that attracts us to this place is the sacrifice that was made here. But we also stand in a place of greatness. We would all be speaking German or Japanese if it wasn't for this region and specifically this mill, and also the blood that was poured out here for justice. And so what I thought I'd do is I just wanted to read something. I know that Bill was an incredible scholar, and yet he was drawn to the working class in France, and he was also drawn to the working class in the United States. What I'm going to read from, it's called the Book of Sirach. It was originally written in Greek in Alexandria after Alexander the Great had conquered the Egyptian Empire, the Persian Empire, and it was part of the Jewish Bible for hundreds and hundreds of years. It was also part of, well, for example, the first version, the King James. By the time of the 1900s, this reading only exists within the Orthodox tradition and the Catholic. But I don't think there's anything more profound about the trades and crafts. And as a matter of fact, the subtitle says trades and crafts. I think this is what attracted Bill both to the working class in France and also to here. So I'd just like to read it for a minute. Who drives oxen and is occupied with their work, and whose talk is about bulls? He sets his heart on plowing furrows and is careful about fodder for the heifers. So it is with every artisan and master artisan who labors by night as well as by day. Those who cut the signets of seals, each is diligent in making a great variety. They set their heart on painting a lifelike image, and they're careful to finish their work. So it is with the smith, sitting by the anvil, intent on his ironwork. The breath of fire melts his flesh, and he struggles with the heat of the furnace. The sounds of the hammer deafens his ears, and his eyes are on the pattern of the object. He sets his heart on finishing his handiwork, and he is careful to complete its decoration. So it is with the potter sitting at his work and turning the wheel with his feet. He always is deeply concerned over his products, and he produces them in quantity. He molds the clay with his arm. He makes it pliable with his feet. He sets his heart to finish the glazing, and he takes care for the firing in the kiln. All these rely on their hands. All are skillful in their own work. Without them, no city can be inhabited. And wherever they live, they will not go hungry. Yet they're not sought out for the counsel of the people, nor do they attain eminence in public assembly. They do not sit in a judge's seat, nor do they understand the decisions of the courts. They cannot expound discipline or judgment, and they are not found among the rulers. But they maintain the fabric of the world, and their concern is for the exercise of their trade. And as one scholar has translated, and I love this title of those who work, they hold stable the fabric of the world, and their work is their prayer. That is what I believe attracted Bill to this cause.
Maintain the fabric of the world. Last night from this stage, a wonderful actor playing the Methodist Reverend McCollester gave his powerful funeral oration for John Morris, one of the slain Homestead strikers in 1892. McCollester called the Homestead steelworkers the bone and sinew of the land. In many ways, Rosemary Trump is the bone and sinew of the Battle of Homestead organization. Rosemary.
Well, I want to welcome you to this hallowed sacred ground because the battle between the Pinkerton hired agents and Frick and Carnegie and the townspeople, including the women and children, actually took place on these grounds and in that side of the building. This section of the pump house was not built until about 20 or 30 years later, but that is the building that was here in 1892 where the workers engaged the Pinkertons and the Carnegie Steel Company to preserve their town, to preserve their jobs, to preserve their livelihoods, and to fight for the rights of the working class. And William Beik was that person as well, and he visited and participated in all of our programs for the last 10 years of his life, celebrating those workers who fought, struggled, and literally gave their blood for the purpose of elevating humankind and civilization. And I want to thank you for coming to celebrate his life here today with us. And who would have thought this mild-mannered, quiet, reserved scholar would choose to become a member of a gang? He was happy to actually sign a membership card to become a member of the Pump House Gang, which is a part of the Battle of Homestead Foundation. And I would ask if his family, the Pump House Gang, could all rise at this time so that our out-of-town guests will have an idea how many gang members are here to celebrate Bill's life. So gang, please join me by standing up and being recognized by the families and friends of Bill from out of town. So you'll have an opportunity to meet them personally at 3 p.m. We're scheduled to be over at Honest John McLucky, who was the Burgess of Homestead in 1892, as well as a steelworker activist. That restaurant is named for his legacy in this community, and we're going to be able to have food and drink and get to know one another on a more familiar basis. But I do want to ask also the family that have come to join Bill and Carl and Gilbert, if you would stand, turn around, and I'm going to ask each of you to tell us who you are, how you come to be here today, so that we can get to know you, each and every one of you also. Because you now, we are deputizing you as gang members too. So turn around here and introduce yourselves.
I'm Aaron Beik. Bill was my uncle. I come here from Jacksonville, Florida.
And of course, I'm Bill's brother, Steve, and I'm going to have a few words to say a little later, but we are just so blessed to be here, to be able to be here. And I'm going to have a little bit of trouble, but it is a joy to be with all of you and in this place. I don't know whether it was my last trip or the trip before, Millie and Bill drove me out here and gave me, unfortunately it was towards the end of the day, and so there wasn't anything open, but they gave me the full rundown of everything that happened in this property, which was just amazing. And so, anyway, it's a joy to be here.
Her mother and Bill's mother were twin sisters.
Really?
Yes,
Oh,
and
no.
their husbands were best friends in college,
Okay.
married twins. I hate to say this, I'm a Patriots fan. We drove from Cape Cod. When I saw Bill's hat with the Steeler, and
Other family members first that are here? Yes.
My mom is Bonnie's sister, and so her parents were twins, so cousin.
How lovely. And tell us your name, sir.
Donovan, and this is my wife Emily.
Emily.
And
Thank
we're
you.
from Philly area.
Wonderful. Thank you for coming. Other family members? How about comrades? Sorry.
More cousins, John and Beik, and Munhall Beik, and we're from Freedom, the other side of Pittsburgh.
Where are you from?
Freedom.
Very nice. Lovely.
I'm Karen McGuire, and I'm another cousin. We're cousins, and Bill and I were cousins, and this is my partner, Mark.
And where are you from?
We're from Ohio.
I'm Richard Price, and I came to this country in August 1968, and one of the first people I met was Bill. Right now I'm in Maryland.
And where do you reside, sir?
Sorry?
Where do you come from?
Well, we live in Rockville, Maryland, just outside of Washington, D.C.
And who came with you?
My life.
Adele.
I'm a colleague along with Richard of Bill's when he was at Northern Illinois University. And I'm pleased to say that I actually studied in my undergraduate years with Paul Beik, who was my advisor when I was an undergraduate. And when I first met Bill, who I did not know was actually in the department when I went to my interview, I immediately knew who he was having never met him, because he was so close in resemblance to his father, and also the kind but very determined personality, which I think in the whole benefited me when I studied with his father.
Thank you, Tony. Yes.
I'm Janet Gamble Green, and I met Bill and Millie when I was at Northern Illinois University. Also, my first husband, Doug Gamble, was on the faculty at the same university as Bill. And Millie and I were in graduate school in the Library of Science department together. So I knew Bill and Millie before they were Bill and Millie. And Millie's both of them have been an inspiration to me because of their untiring devotion to making sure that scholarship gets outside the door of the university. And I'm here today with my husband, David Green, who also has been friends with both of them for a long time.
Ken Kish, I'm a next door neighbor. This is my wife, Mary Ann, and I always tried to help around the house. My main job recently was filling Bill's bird feeder, which gave him a lot of pleasure.
Very good. Thank you. You know, most people retire, go off to Florida or Georgia or somewhere south for a nicer climb. God bless you and Bill for coming and choosing to be with us and joining our family. The Christmas parties, the Thanksgiving dinners, the birthdays that we have shared over these last 10 years, as well as all the wonderful functions after our events and just sharing your life and your joys and your getting to know you individually and to appreciate the work that you did prior to this and the contributions, including Millie and Beik started our movie series. They came and started on a Thursday night once a month from April to October. We have a movie series. And that plaque that you see out there, she started it all. She got a local boy that went off to the West Coast, made billions of dollars, and to give us 10 grand to install that plaque, which has created momentum to get other grants to continue the work of the Battle of Homestead. You mean so much to us, Millie. And Bill also, he's in the house. He created the video that we saw, the music that we heard earlier. And I want you to know that that he truly lived up to the Francophile colors of the flag, the blue, the white, the red, and certainly lived out his life with liberty, fraternity, and equality, and pursued all of the above. And vive la France, vive la Francophile Bill, and viva Bill Beik. Really, absolutely. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rose.
Thank you.
Those of us who know Mike Snout know that he's a very shy, bashful, quiet, reserved person. And of course, Bill Beik being very loud, brash, and highly verbal, they were automatically drawn to each other. And so Mike has a tribute.
Millie will be the first to tell you, Bill and I had a real special relationship. Back when I worked in the steel mill, every morning before I worked in the mill, when we started work, we always had a safety meeting, the maintenance department I worked in. And at the safety meeting, we spend the first 15 or 20 minutes jagging each other, pulling each other's choke, pulling each other's chain, whatever you want to call it, joking with each other. Some people wouldn't, oh. I mean, if you didn't understand Millie's language, you had no idea, but when I met Bill, he was so reserved. I said, I gotta pull this guy's choke. I gotta pull his chain. So, you know, he maintained that reserved look at first for a couple of times, but then he loosened up. And we got to know each other real well. And every time that I saw Bill, I looked forward to pulling his choke. And I looked forward to telling him that I loved him. And I looked forward to giving him a hug. And I look forward to giving him that double French kiss on both cheeks. And the last two times I saw Bill, the time before, he was, Millie brought him to the Battle of Homestead breakfast, and he was sitting in the back because he could barely walk or hold his head up, and he had his head, the last, for you who didn't see or didn't know, the last year especially were just excruciating for Bill. I mean, when he would eat, he would literally have his head laying on the table. He couldn't, his muscles didn't work, and he didn't move his head up. So his head was laying on the table in the back of the room, and he looked up, and I started walking back toward him, and he looked up, and all of a sudden he got this big shit-eating grin on his face, like, oh, here comes Mike. And I gave him a big hug, and I gave him a big kiss on the cheek, and he was so happy. And then my wife Stephanie and I went to see Bill and Millie. As soon as we got back, we did a month and a half in Scotland and hiked Hadrian's Wall and went to see it. It was the same thing. As soon as Bill was laying there in his chair, and as soon as he saw us walk in the room, it was like, ah! It was like a 10-year-old getting a Christmas present. Like when I would walk in, because he knew he was going to get a kiss. He knew he was going to get a hug, and he knew he was going to get some love. And he was so happy that last couple hours that we spent with him. I can't even tell you. And Bill was just like any other human being. He just wanted some love. And he wanted people to treat him with respect. And I can't tell you how much love I have for him and how much hate I have for the diseases and the stuff that killed him. It just tears me up that you know, people can't connect the dots and stuff. But when I went to see him with Millie at the hospital, Steph and I went there and saw him. I told Millie right when I walked in the door, I said, I got to write a song about Bill. And so I, of course, primed the pump and talked to Charlie and talked to Millie and talked to Linda and his friends. And there's a lot of songs out there about friendship. Dave Van Ronk had a song. He was my, you know, he's my friend. A lot of people had friendship songs, but this is a very special song I wrote just for Bill Beik. It's called "He Was a Best Friend of Mine."
happy recollections when he went there with his dad. He liked their fighting spirit of liberty and equality. In Paris he could hear it strike a blow against tyranny. With rebellion in his soul, he'd always take a stand on his long and winding road from Homestead, PA to France. Millie and the working class were his romance. Now he was the best friend of mine. Now people believe was the best friend of mine. Good food and wine were essential, though his body was in pain. Their house was party central for their friends in the punk house gang. I loved to make him laugh, pull his choke and make him smile. He'd take my gas and jokes with a professor's grace and style. Wasn't no mere acquaintance, a passerby by night. We had a cordial relationship, it bonded us real tight. He loved all kinds of music, French classical to rock. The pictures he would use it to make his vision talk. I cursed the Parkman Sun's disease that robbed him of his life. All the poisons and the bitter weed that stabbed him like a knife. I declare to him and Millie, as his body returns to dust, a better world I'll build. In his words we can trust, with his promise in his memory for us. He was the best friend of mine, oh Millie. Was the best friend of mine, oh brothers. He was the best friend of mine, our sisters. He was the best friend of mine, our people. He was the best friend of mine, our people. He was the best friend of mine, our people. He was the best friend of mine. Was the best friend of mine.
I wanted to present a special gift to Millie, a keepsake for her and Carl and the whole family that they can have to remember. And we did a special picture frame of the song I wrote for Bill, but we have three pictures up here. And of course on the right here is Bill the professor. On the left here is Bill the radical guy in France. And in the middle, appropriately, is Bill and Millie. So this is for them. So, and this on behalf of the whole Battle of Homestead Foundation.
I want Joe and Delsa White, who visited back and forth with Bill and Millie many times at their house and at Bill and Millie's house. I know they wanted to say a few words.
Hi, everyone. Mike did the job of talking about Bill as a friend, and he was a friend to so many of us. I would see Bill at my house, I would see Bill at his house, I would see Bill in a restaurant, I would see Bill in this room, which is the last time I really saw him before he went down. What I wanted to add to what Mike said is how easy he was to love. He was a quiet guy, but was he affectionate? Anytime I saw Bill, he would open his arms and hug and kiss. And I will never forget that. And when we went to France for our 50th anniversary, Bill told us the spots to go and see. Of course, they were all spots where radical activity had taken place. It's so wonderful. We got to see cathedrals we wouldn't have seen. We got to see monuments we wouldn't have seen. We got to see the place where Jean Jaurès grew up and lived and fought for freedom. And that was particularly meaningful to me because I had written my senior paper about Jean Jaurès and didn't even know I was going to where he came from. I'm really going to miss holding Bill in my arms and knowing that he might have been seemingly quiet to some people, but he was so affectionate, and I will never forget that. Thank you.
The world has a lot of historians. Okay. In fact, the world might even have enough historians, who knows? Okay. But Bill was a wonderful historian, so much so that I would like to spend the couple of minutes I have reading to you out of Bill's own writings in what I take to be his opus magnus, a social and cultural history of early modern France. Here is what Bill had to say about artisans. Okay. Artisans, he says, were the most important citizens of early modern France. It was they who did all of the processing of raw materials, the making of commodities, the construction of buildings, the decorating of churches and palaces. In short, of the skilled and non-agricultural work. Artisans worked with relatively simple tools, using jealously guarded techniques passed down from previous generations. It was no small task to construct a shoe or make a wagon wheel or a barrel. Virtually everything one needed in this society to dress, plow, furnish, build, or travel was laboriously made to order by hand. This meant that consumers had direct personal relations with the persons who made them a table or shoed their horses, or that they valued their final product because it was not so easily replaced. End quote. Compare for a moment the plainly mendacious advertisement for Budweiser beer. This Bud's for you. No, it isn't. Bud doesn't know who you are or I am. And aside for the fact that we get thirsty for beer, they don't really care. Okay. Here is what Bill had to write about civilians and the scourge of war. Contact with military activity was without question the worst thing that could happen to a civilian population. Those trapped in a war were, especially peasants in open countryside who had little defense, were of course vulnerable to the extreme. Towns with walls were safer, and townspeople behind walls had more room to maneuver. If they were properly fortified, they might even temporarily withstand the siege. But even they could not hold out forever against a real attack, and the consequences of not surrendering promptly would likely be pillage and devastation for the inhabitants. Close quote. Here next is what Bill had to say about soldiers in early modern France. For a simple soldier, to enroll in the army was to enter a different life. He would be removed from all the collective bonds that defined his existence, family, parish, village, and plunged into a masculine world of hardship, rootlessness, and violent camaraderie. The law stated that enrollment must be voluntary. Recruitment abuses were sometimes punished, but the king was more interested in gaining recruits than in worrying about how they were signed up. Troops were recruited by captains trying to fulfill their commissions. Traditionally, these enrollees might be the tenants of a local lord, or at least villagers who knew each other from the same vicinity. But familiar or not, their commanding officers would be nobles of superior status, and commentators invariably argued that the foot soldier should be chosen from the dregs of society. Thus, the social gulf between powerful elites and subordinate underlings was reproduced in the army. Finally, I'd like to share with you what I consider, well, what I'm quite sure actually, was Bill's bottom line in this wonderful book he has written. Okay. He begins by saying, France, or at least Paris, would have appeared to an intelligent observer in the year 1788 as the very center of the civilized world. There were, of course, problems, but no reason to suppose that they could somehow or other be resolved as problems had been resolved in the past. Nobody had the slightest idea that a full-fledged revolution with striking world consequences was about to unfold. Let me repeat that sentence. Nobody had the slightest idea that a full-fledged revolution with striking world consequences was about to unfold. Close quotes. Okay, well, we historians, including Bill, had a name for this world that was about to be changed so cataclysmically and profoundly in 1789. And that term is ancien regime. Okay, I expect a phrase that just about all of you have heard either in your history classes or elsewhere. Okay, but for reasons that he explained, Bill did not use the term ancien regime because an ancien regime, if you stop to think about it, as Bill was always encouraging you to stop and think about things, an ancien regime does not come into existence until it has been overthrown. An ancien regime does not come into full existence until it's been overthrown. Okay, now, what we know, okay, is not what's going to happen next year. But what we know is that there is no better appropriate concept that sums up the American of today than ancien regime. Okay? We live in a world that has all the stigmata, all the defining characteristics of the early modern France that Bill wrote so wonderfully about. And that, I think, is Bill's challenge to us all. Bill might not have struck many of us as a challenging fellow, but I think he was our challenge. And I think Bill shared it, because Bill did call himself a radical, you know. Bill's challenge, I take to be that we turn the dreadful society we have now into an ancien regime with all our might and all our intelligence and all the learning that Bill has imparted to us. Thank you.
I'd like to ask Sharon Beatty, another staunch Battle of Homesteader, felt very close to both Bill and
Bob and I haven't been around as long as a lot of you have to know Bill and Millie as long as you have. When we knew Bill, he had so many physical troubles, but he had such a spirit. His book is, another one of his books is called Absolutism and Society in 17th Century France, State Power and Provincial Aristocracy in Languedoc. This was given to us on one of our visits to Millie and Bill's house. My husband Bob is interested in the contents of this, but when I go to a bookstore or a library, the first thing I do is read the acknowledgments. I want to know who it is that the author wants to thank, who it was that was important in their life. So I'm going to read Bill's words of at the end of his introduction. Then there are those whose influence has been so pervasive that no simple thanks are adequate. My sons, Eric Hoffman and Carl Hoffman, who have had to grow up living with a Languedoc they have never seen, contributed endless patience, encouragement, and good cheer. Finally, there is Millie Beik, who has taught me more than words can acknowledge, and whose influence is alive on every page. Those are Bill's words about who he loved the most.
John Haer, the president of the Battle of Homestead Foundation, will come forward and invite, I think, some of the family folks.
Hi, everybody. Millie asked that I acknowledge several of Bill's friends and colleagues who expected to be here today, but they could not come for reasons of their own physical health. She mentioned David Hunt from the University of Massachusetts. She mentioned Jonathan Prude and Judith Miller from Emory University. They really had hoped to come and were just unable to do so for reasons beyond their control. Millie did write out a little bit further explanation of the friends and relatives are here, and I'd like to read it because I think some of the others may not have heard when the friends stood up. So I would just like to acknowledge again Bill's brother, his younger brother Steve, who came up from Florida with his son Adam. So Steve and Adam. And Bonnie Robichaud, a cousin, and Bonnie is here, a cousin of Bill's, younger than Bill, came from Cape Cod with her husband of 50 years, Richard Robichaud, and grew up with Bill. And Janet Beik, a cousin of Bill's, she came with her sister Linda Beik, and after a career in the State Department, she and her husband Robert Klaus returned to Freedom, PA. Beaver County, right, in 2012. Sadly, Robert died in June. Thank you, Janet, for coming. And Karen McGuire, a cousin of Bill's. Karen came from Ohio with Mark Gaskill, and that's Karen and Mark. And Donovan Matoli came. He's the son of Bill's cousin, Gene Matoli. And Donovan came here with his wife, Emily, from Center Valley, PA. Donovan is here. And academic friends who are here. Richard Price is a historian of British history who recently retired from the University of Maryland. He's an old friend and colleague of Bill's at Northern Illinois University, and I know Richard said hello before. Darrell D., a historian of French, Spanish history, a prize student of Bill's, who came from Canada with his wife Amy and daughter Inez. And there they were. Thank you, Darrell. And Jim Collins is a historian of French history at Georgetown University. He came from Washington, D.C. And
Harvey Smith.
And Harvey Smith.
NIU.
From Northern Illinois. Harvey, is Harvey here? Yes, there's Harvey, who briefly spoke. And Janet Green, and Janet spoke briefly with us. Janet is here. David Green, and Janet grew up in McDowell County, West Virginia, and earned a labor history degree from NYU. So we have a lot of labor historians here. And Mary Ann or Ken Kitch, friends and neighbors of Bill, great people, and spoke briefly. And then Millie again wanted to mention her good friends and family, part of the Battle of Homestead Foundation. On my part, I came to know Bill and Millie about 5 years ago after I became involved with the Battle of Homestead Foundation, and spent several times at their house where there was always wonderful hospitality and strategizing about where we go from here, and also watching some football games and things like that while we were there. And everyone here should know that the new marker outside this building, on this side, if you haven't gone to see it, please do. this is truly a product of Millie's imagination and industry with our organization. She spurred our application and wrote our application for a grant. She helped to formulate, and believe me, this is not easy in an organization where everyone has to edit something. She helped to spur and finalize the language on the marker. And when we had a wonderful celebration here April a year ago, including the mayors of the municipalities, students from Steel Valley High School, Mike singing and leading us in song, and a full house. Millie spoke outside by the marker, thanking folks, and it was a wonderful time for all. And as we grow older and become aware of our own mortality, there is nothing more important than good friends, and we're so happy to have you.
Great to see all of you people here. It means so much. Everything that's being said means so much, especially to the family. Bill Beik was my hero. He was 6 years older than I was. And around the Beik households, there's a picture of, in most of the households, that I'm going to refer to you now just briefly. It was taken at a busy intersection coming from our house going to Swarthmore High School. And my brother Bill was on the one side, red light, very busy intersection, and he was there with his friend Mike. They both had ties on, which is ridiculous to me. I think they were in 11th grade, but that's how they did it then. And who to be across the street, the side street, but little Steve. And during that time, Bill's eyes were locked on me, and my eyes were locked on him. Bill was clearly watching out for his little brother. Second anecdote from way back when. Back in those days, Bill was a member of the high school marching band at Swarthmore High School. And on every Saturday when there were football games, the band would march through the town and play their instruments and so forth. Well, I walked beside my brother as he marched and played in the band as it went through town. And he never said to me, beat it. He let me stay there and march with him the whole time. Fast forward a little bit. My wife and I were in our first home in State College, Pennsylvania. And we were blessed by a visit from Bill and Millie, Carl and Eric, and we had such a great time. The boys were out, I don't know whether you remember this, but the boys were out playing in the backyard in the green grass, and they were having a great time, and we got to know the family. And it was just a blessing for him, and what a team that turned out to be. Don't worry, I'm not going too long. There are only a few sheets of paper here.
Keep going, brother.
And of course, and there are people in this room, there will be no argument. Bill was a professor's professor. I doubt if you would find any of the students, and I gather one of the students is here, that did not like William Beik, the professor. I dare you to find one. Did you know on the side, Professor Bill became a rock and roll disc jockey at one of the schools he was teaching at on the campus radio station. And he was really good at it, and the students just loved it. And so that was something some of you may not have known about Bill. You know, despite his medical challenges, my brother continued to work on multiple projects and never stopped. And I mean never stopped. My son Aaron reminded me here on this trip that Bill wrote to him and to our 3 other children periodically back and forth. I didn't even realize that was happening, but he was taking interest, and I'm sure he took interest in so many other people as well. And also, I just want to say that despite those many, many challenges, Millie did a supernatural job taking care of him and seeing that he was taken care of. And it's just such a blessing to know what she did over this long period of time. I just want to end it by saying, my brother Bill is still my hero. Thank you.
The French have a word for people like Bill. It is valable. I don't think there's an exact translation in English, but the 18th century Englishman would have referred to that same quality as bottom, as having a bottom. Comes, of course, from shipbuilding. And what it means, I think, obviously, is somebody who is grounded, somebody who is strong, somebody who has value and integrity. And that, for me, characterizes Bill. When I first encountered him in August 1968, he was from Harvard. His first affect to me was of this quiet, reserved, perhaps severe guy. And within a few weeks, I saw the other side of Bill that's been referred to already, because he started writing reviews for the local underground newspaper, News from Nowhere, rock music reviews, and his faculty colleagues were just astounded that this respectable, and he was the most responsible of the new young faculty that were hired in 1968, and I assure you that he was responsible. Here was this guy writing reviews of the Beatles and Rolling Stones, and later, as Steve referred, did a turn as a disc jockey too. And these two sides of Bill, I always found so refreshing, if also slightly odd. A gentle man, a rational, reasonable man, but a man with passion and with emotion that came out in his rock reviews, and of course was reflected in his commitment to the history of the lower classes of France and his political commitments to radical action in the present day. So it was Bill's strength of character, his strength of will, and his well-rounded rationality and capacity also for joy and openness that I remember and I celebrate in him. He was, in last years especially, a model in how to live.
Hi, I'm Daryl. I'm Bill's student. I was his doctoral student at Emory. And Millie calls me Bill's prize student, which touches me profoundly. But I have to say, if I can speak for all of his students, we all thought we were the luckiest people to be studying with Bill. I like what Harvey Smith said earlier, how he described Bill as gentle but determined. And that really captures how Bill was as a teacher and as a mentor. He was gentle but determined. He was so encouraging to us, his students, and yet he was so incisively critical when we turned in work or when we talked to him about French history. And his depth of knowledge about France is measureless, I think. I wish I could today equal what he knew about France. I don't think I ever will. But one of the greatest things about Bill at the same time was how humble he was. I remember he assigned his book on social protest to a group of his students. And he told us right away, look, I want you to be really critical about this book. Don't hold back any punches. Tell me where I've gone wrong. And for a scholar of that eminence, of the contributions that he made to our field, for him to encourage mere students to criticize his own work is something that gives you real confidence, that makes you feel that you can really play the big leagues. So Bill was a peerless mentor. He really was a great teacher. And he's also a fine example of how to behave as an academic. He was always scrupulously fair and always generous with his time and always supportive to all of his students. So if I can just gently correct Steve for a second. His students didn't like him. We loved him. We really did. I've been in contact with several of his students, and just the outpouring of love for Bill is truly touching. But if I can just speak a little more, I don't know if we have. Bill was more than just a mentor to me. He was also a dear friend. And if I could share a couple of anecdotes, I remember I was in Paris, and Bill and Millie were making their last trip to Paris. I'm a historian and I'm terrible with dates, so I don't remember what year it was. I'd like to guess 2007, Millie? 2009. And I remember meeting Bill and Millie, and in typical Bill fashion, he would not give any ground to his condition. And so they came in from the airport by train and just got to their apartment in the heart of Paris. And for those of you who know Paris, the trip from Boissy to the heart of the city is long and involves a lot of stairs, and yet Bill and Millie just did that. But I remember meeting them in a warm summer day. Their apartment was on the Rue Soufflot, right in the shadow of the Panthéon. And I remember we went out for dinner, and we had such a great time. And one of my favorite pictures of Bill, I think Millie took it, and she points out that it's one that we have to particularly treasure because both Bill and I are smiling. And so I have this great memory of Bill from Paris, and that was, of course, Bill and Millie's their adieu to Paris. I think they went to the Rue d'Assas again to see where it all began. But if I could share with you my last memory of Bill. Coming here is especially poignant because I was talking to Bill shortly before he died about the French historians are coming to Pittsburgh. They're coming in March. And I had been organizing panels for Bill in honor of his work, and I had invited Bill to come. And so we've been chatting on the phone about this. The panels, I have to say, when I contacted colleagues and friends, I had no trouble finding people who wanted to pay homage to Bill's work. But that's not the memory I'd like to end on. It was a conversation I had with Bill about a week before he died. And in April, the last time I saw Bill, I brought my wife and 2-year-old daughter to see him. And Bill and Millie were so generous to us. We had a wonderful Easter lunch, and my 2-year-old daughter had such a great time with both of them. And when Bill and I spoke, and this was about a week before he passed, he told me that he was so happy to see me, how happy he was to see me that April, because I was living this, he called it a very balanced life. That not only was I now an academic, but also I had this other part of my life. And that really drives home for me how much Bill wasn't just my mentor and someone that I strive to emulate in my academic life, but also that he had the generosity and the love and the to see this other part of me as well. So these are the memories I have, and I was glad to speak to him that last time. So thank you very much.
I'm Jim Collins. I teach at Georgetown, and Bill and I go back 35 years. The first time I met him was at a conference in Winnipeg in 1982, and nobody knew I was there because I'd been put on the program at the last minute at the Western Society. And at that time, I had published one article in a French journal, Annales, and I was at one of the sessions in the early part of the conference, and one of the paper givers, whom I won't identify, a Canadian historian, talked about my article and misrepresented it, I thought. He didn't understand what I was talking about. So this guy in the front of the room gets up, which of course was Bill, and says, no, you have it all wrong. That's just ridiculous. This is what it meant. And I said, yeah, that's right. And so the two of them get in this argument. It goes on for about 10 minutes. And finally I get up in the back room and say, well, actually I'm the author of that article, and he's right, and that other guy's an idiot. Right? So we got off to a really good start. And it's an interesting thing because Bill and I probably are intertwined about as much as two historians could be, in the sense that, excuse me, Bill was the person who asked me to do the State in Early Modern France book, which was kind of a presentation of a type of history of the state that Bill and I had pioneered in the field of looking at the state from the bottom up. And he had looked at Languedoc and I had looked at Brittany. And his book came out before mine. He was the editor of that series, and he asked me to do that book, which tried to present the new revisionist take on early modern French history, which has been, of course, attacked by people like Daryl. But I don't hold any grudges because we published Daryl's book in a series I edited, so this is a very small community where we're trying to get to some kind of answers. Then, shortly after that, I was one of the evaluators for Bill's promotion at Emory. Then the book that you read from, was right there, I was the reader for that book, the press's reader. And Bill had started out his book just on social history, and I encouraged Bill to add in cultural history. He and I talked about that book probably more than I've ever talked with anybody about any book either I wrote or they wrote. Because we both felt very strongly that the new generation of historians had lost track of the social history of France. And I know for a fact that Bill wrote that book because all these people writing about cultural history were writing about a culture without knowing anything about this society. And he wrote that book for them, and it's a wonderful gift for them, I have to say. Now, and then the last thing, really, in a sense, was he has also a little book called Louis XIV, which is a book of documents that students use. I just used it in a class last week, in fact.
And the publisher asked me to do that book, but I was then chair of the department at Georgetown, which doesn't give you enough time to have a cup of coffee, let alone write a book. So I said to them, well, I don't have time to write it. You definitely want Bill Beik to write it. And so Bill ended up writing that book. So over the course of 30 years, we constantly went back and forth, each of us doing stuff with the other person. And I'll miss it. Thanks.
I want to talk about Bill Beik's career from the bottom up. I was his friend, and by the time I really got to know him, I was working at a job and I was taking courses on my lunch hour at Northern Illinois University. I studied with Richard Price, who's also here, but I didn't study with Bill. However, I really wanted to see what all the fuss was about, because Bill was teaching a class, if you've ever been to a large public university, which Northern Illinois University was. It was a school out in the middle of the cornfields, and all the students came out from Chicago. And Bill was teaching, I don't know what the class was, I just went to see it, but it must have been Western Civ. There were 300 people in this class. And Bill was up front, and this was probably 1972, I think, maybe early. And nobody was doing audiovisual things in class. That was considered to be very tasteless. I mean, anybody would even think about doing audiovisual things in class. So people had their aged, rusting notes, and they would come shuffling in, and not you, Richard, but come shuffling in and read from their notes. And it was a very, us and them kind of presentation. So Bill's class, it had 3 giant screens in the front and a huge surround sound system. And I walked in the room and there was Vivaldi on the recorder, and there were these slides of the architecture of France and paintings. I don't remember anything about what he said. I just remember this experience, which was so different from anything that anybody had ever done in an academic hall. And so he was really on the cutting edge of trying to reach a different audience and Western Civ people are asleep. They do not give a crap about being awake. And yeah, they were awake. Now there was still the back row where people smoking dope and sleeping and eating lunch or whatever they were doing, but the people were engaged, and Bill was like a rock star with this going on. It was truly transformative, and I know he was very proud of this work, because if you've known him, you know that he makes these videos with the music all the time. But if you can imagine what this was like in the lecture hall in 1972, it was completely unexpected and quite remarkable. So, and also he had hair that looked just like mine. He had lots of curls, and it was floppy, and he was, it was just, you wanted to fall in love with him even if you didn't know him, because he was so excited about his subject, and he wanted you to be excited too.
I also wasn't going to say anything, but my mom, Jean, was his cousin, and Bonnie, our sister's here, and they were very, very close. And she moved away in 1969 to Haight-Ashbury in San Francisco, moved all the way to the west coast of the country, and we grew up out there always hearing about Bill and her cousin and how much she loved him. And so, my interactions with them were few because we were far away. We saw him at reunions and my grandparents' 50th anniversary and things like that. But we just loved him, and I corresponded with him in the early 90s because I was a history major and wanted to follow in his footsteps. And last year we came out, and my son, my 10-year-old son, played rummy with him. And we just had a wonderful weekend. So that is a great memory, and on behalf of my mom, who couldn't fly out, my dad has health issues right now, she really wanted to be here. I wanted to come and just pass on her love. So that was the first thing from a kind of a family side. And then my sister just sent me an email, which just kind of speaks to Daryl's comments. And I think there's probably thousands of former students, hundreds of former students that just love him and might not even know, they've lost touch, that he's passed. And my sister works at Reed College, which is a liberal arts college in Portland, Oregon. And she just met the chair of the history department, about a year ago. They were talking, and she said, her cousin, his former history professor, because his expertise was French as well. And he's like, who is it? It's a small world. And as soon as he heard it was Bill Beik, he's like, wow, he was one of my mentors. And just went on and on. So my sister, when Bill passed, ran over to his office. He's now the chair of the history department, and left him a note because she missed him. And here's the email he just sent back. And I wasn't planning on reading this, but I just thought it speaks again to what Daryl says. He says, "Hi, Dayspring. Thank you for stopping by. We must have just missed each other by a few minutes. It was very thoughtful of you. I am just flat out devastated by this news. It couldn't have, okay, let's see. I am at least heartened to know that he passed away at home with Millie and family around him. Please convey my deepest condolences to them. Bill was a mentor to me. We met when he came to Brown to give a talk while I was a graduate student, and from that point on, he was always generous with his advice and support. He was beloved by his colleagues in early modern French history who admired not only the quality of his work as a historian, his book on, and I'm not even going to go into pronouncing these things, was foundational for anyone studying the 17th century, but also his generosity as a mentor and colleague. I suspect that his family already knows this, but if they do not, please convey to them and everyone that he was a giant in our field and he will be sorely missed by all of us. Best, Michael, Professor of History and Humanities and Chair of the History Department at Reed College." So I think that just speaks to many others that are out there.
At this point, I would like to ask Father Jay to come for the benediction.
It is an interesting combination of workers and scholarship all in one place. And whatever this attraction is, it's like the first time I met Charlie McCollester after I had read some of his book, and it was, here's a guy with a PhD from Belgium, the Louvain, and yet he could swear like a steelworker. I was really impressed. And I think the same thing with Bill. There's something about being a scholar because you're laboring with your mind instead of your hands. And I had read that little passage about the trades and the workers, which ended with, "But they hold stable the fabric of the world, and their concern is for the exercise of their trade." Or as one said, they hold stable the fabric of the world, and their labor is their prayer. Following that whole thing on trades is something that reminds me of Bill. How different is it, the one who devotes himself to study? He seeks out the wisdom of the ancients. He's concerned with prophecies and preserves the sayings of the famous and penetrates the subtleties of parables. He will seek out hidden meanings of proverbs. He's at home with obscurities. He serves among the great and appears before rulers. He travels in foreign lands and learns what is good and evil in the human lot. He sets his heart to rise early, to seek he who made him, to petition the Most High. He opens his mouth in prayer and asks for pardon for his sins. If the Lord is willing, he will be filled with the spirit of understanding. He will pour forth words of wisdom of his own and give thanks to the Lord in prayer. The Lord will direct his counsel and knowledge as he meditates on its mysteries. He will show the wisdom of what it is that he has learned and the glory in the law of the Lord's covenant. Many will praise his understanding. He will never be blotted out. His memory will not disappear, and his name will live through all generations. Nations will speak of his wisdom, and the congregation will proclaim his prayer. If he lives long, he will leave a name greater than 1,000, and if he goes to rest, it is enough for him. I think that is Bill, the scholar and scribe.
One of Bill's favorite all-time songs was Let It Be by the Beatles. And I'd like everybody to join in. Before I do that, I just want to acknowledge a couple of people real quick. First off, my wife Stephanie, who had to listen to me. When you write a song and sing it and memorize it, you sing it over 200 times, and she had to listen to me sing Bill's song over 200 times. So, and then also this guitar player here, Kevin McDonald, one of the most famous musicians in Pittsburgh. He's nationally renowned with Trace Lads. He's a co-producer on my CDs. He writes all the guitar riffs on my songs. Kevin McDonald, give him a big hand out. And last, I'd like to acknowledge Millie's son, Carl, for coming in. Carl was on the lam, running from the Trump administration, hiding in the Sierra Madre in Mexico, and he snuck back in here and was here in a matter of a day when he found out. And thanks, Carl, for coming and taking care of Millie in this time of need. So please join in with me. Let it be. When I find myself in times of trouble, my Mary comes to me. Big words of wisdom, let it be. In my hour of darkness, she is standing right in front of me. Speaking words of wisdom, let it be. Oh, let it be, let it be, let it be, let it be. Speaking words of wisdom, let it be. When the broken hearted people stand in the way, there will be an answer, let it be. But though they may be parted, there is still a chance that they may see. Shine into tomorrow, let it be. Oh, let it be, let it be, let it be, let it be. There will be an answer, let it be. When the night is cloudy, there is still a light that shines on me. Shine until tomorrow, let it be. I wake up to the sound of music. Mother Mary comes to me. Speak words of wisdom, let it be. Oh, let it be, let it be, let it be, let it be. There will be an answer, let it be. Oh, let it be, let it be, let it be, let it be. Speaking words of wisdom from Brother Bill Beik, let it be. Bill, thank you. Thank you, Millie. I love you.
And I can't thank you all for coming to the service. It's so beautiful, and for taking part, everybody. I just think